Hey, hi, welcome to my shop virtually. My name is Jeff. Been a member of the St. Louis Woodturners for a couple years now, several years actually, and happy to do this. This is a sharpening demonstration, and you have the ability to ask questions. I can show some things in real time, answer some of your questions, try to help you out, dial you in. I'm out here with Tom Zeller. Tom is out here. He organized this event, and we have a write-up. We have an outline because it's Tom, and we're going to try to run with that outline. But I wanted to talk about a couple of things real quick right up front, dispel a couple of myths. And this is just stuff that, especially if you're in the chat rooms online or on Facebook or whatever, there's an enormous amount of information, and a lot of that information is wrong or not complete or something. So with sharpening, there's many ways to do it, but you have to understand what you're doing before you can really get a good edge on your wood turning tools. And the first thing that I like to talk about briefly is pointing out that modern high-speed steel, so basically any tool that has been made by a reputable company within the last 12 to 15 years, is made out of high-speed steel, and that high-speed steel is either going to be graded M2, M42, or A11 powdered metal. Those are the three primaries, and those modern high-speed steel metals cannot be heated to the point in your own shop where you will damage the temper. I don't care if it's red, I don't care if it's orange, I don't care if it's burning white hot. You can't do it. You cannot damage the temper on modern high-speed steel tools simply because the quenching temper of modern high-speed steel is about 2200 degrees. And if you get your tool that hot, you have other problems, like your shop is on fire, the grinder is melted, and you probably need to be calling the fire department. So don't worry about bluing or glowing or damaging, don't worry about damaging the temper of modern high-speed steel. Now, that said, there's a lot of tools out there that folks are still using. They're perfectly fine. They're either not high-speed steel or they're a questionable blend of something that is labeled high-speed steel, but we really don't know what it is. The better tools are going to be like the older style Craftsman, ones that were specifically manufactured in the US when Craftsman was still manufacturing stuff in the US. Those are high carbon steel, which is not the same thing. A different type of metal, different type of edge. Those tools, you can absolutely damage the temper if you blew the edge. Those tools you need to worry about quenching. The other tool that I wanted to talk about is the Harbor Freight. Good old Harbor Freight. They've got lots of stuff, and we all know how that works. And sometimes you get a really good machine or tool, and sometimes it's pure crap. But Harbor Freight type tools, the very low quality tools, there's nothing wrong with them. This is mine, and it used to be a roughing gouge, one of their roughing gouges from the $45 set. So I did not splurge for the $80 set. I splurged on the $45 set. And this tool has literally made hundreds of pens for me. But I don't know what the steel is. It's not decent quality M2 or better high-speed steel. Therefore, I need to pay attention when I'm sharpening this tool because I don't know what it is. So I'm not going to get it hot. I'm going to try really hard not to blue the edge. But when you're, just know what metals your tools are made out of. Most modern tools have it stamped on there, that the tool will tell you what it is. A quick Google if you don't know for sure. If you've got a brand name on the handle, you should be able to find out. Really try to stick with either M2 high-speed steel, M42 high-speed steel, or A11 powdered metal, which technically also is a high-speed steel. And when I say high-speed steel, these are metals that are designed to be used and operated in an environment where things are moving at a high rate of speed. Okay, so a hand chisel, a bench chisel, or a hand plane or something like that, it's not going to be a high-speed steel because it's being powered by the human body and it's not moving at a high rate of speed. Or the workpiece like we do is not moving at a high rate of speed. That metal is different. It's softer. The sharpening process is different.
Oh, you can't.
Yeah, I can. But those tools are not the same type of metal as what we're trying to use in the turning shop. So wood turning tools and drill bits are made out of high-speed steel because of that element of fast motion. Okay. Now about quenching, the tools can get hot when you're grinding them, especially if you're reshaping a profile or changing a tool or doing a lot of grinding to modify or fix something. It can get hot enough to burn your hands. So be aware. Be very careful, however, of quenching modern high-speed steel because that can create micro fractures in the fine edge, and that can shorten the edge life of that tool. So you're not damaging the temper, but you can screw with it metallurgically. Just be real careful about quenching. Here in the wintertime, especially in my shop, it's cold, so I don't need to worry about that. The tools, if they heat up, wave them around in the air like you just don't care, and they're going to cool down just fine. But don't worry about that damaging the temper thing with anything that is made by a reputable company in the modern age. Grinding devices. We've got bench grinders, we've got the Tormek system, we've got the Sorby Pro Edge system. There's lots of ways to do this. You can sharpen your tools with a hand honing card if you need to, if that's what you got. A little bit sharp is better than a lot of bit dull. So whatever you need to do to get to the end results is great. You can spend a lot of money on your sharpening setup. You can spend a smaller amount to get things going. And the basic element is going to be something along the lines of a bench grinder. And I need to move my mouse. I got my bench grinder here. This grinder is, I don't know, about 9 years old now. It's the no-name brand that Woodcraft used to carry back in the day. It's an 8-inch grinder, so it has 8-inch wheels on it. And this one's about a horse. You can get them a half horse, a full horse. It doesn't make a whole lot of difference. But this one here, if you could read it, it says slow speed. And when I say slow speed, I mean 1,725 RPM. So that's kind of fast for something that's called slow speed. But the other option is a high-speed grinder, which is going to run you more 3,200 RPM. Okay, so that's your range. Slow speed, a little over 1,700 RPM. High-speed grinders, about 3,200 RPM. And then there's ones that will run anywhere in between, that they're adjustable. Realistically, when you're sharpening your high-speed tools, you're going to want to run on that slower setting, that 1725 RPM speed, not because of tempering issues, but because turning tools are expensive, and the more time you spend at that grinder, especially if it's going at 3,200 RPM, the more metal you're going to waste. You're just grinding it away, especially if you're learning how to sharpen or you have a heavy hand or whatever. So if you have a higher speed grinder, it's fine. Make sure you're not using a heavy hand. Use light pressure when you're grinding, and always keep in mind that because of the speed of that higher speed grinder, you can absolutely be grinding away and wasting more metal from your turning tools simply because your grinder is moving at a higher rate of speed. Okay, so the 1725 RPM slow speed grinders, maybe consider that a little bit more optimum, but use what you have. You can definitely use what you have. When we go into something like the Tormek system, and I'll talk about it, but I'm not going to demonstrate. The Tormek system actually runs at 90 RPM, so that is ultra slow. And while it was designed for high carbon steels like your hand chisels, your hand carving chisels, your bench plane blades, things of that nature, cutlery from the kitchen. That's why it was designed to run that slow. You can absolutely sharpen your high-speed steel tools on there. If you have an actual Tormek system, the biggest complaint that I've heard from the Tormek users, it's too slow. It's not too slow. It's very slow, but because of the way the motor is designed, the more pressure you put from that tool onto the grinding stone, the more torque the motor is going to push out in response. That it is an intuitive system. The more pressure you apply, the more torque the motor puts out. There's a pulley thing or a pressure thing and it will automatically add more torque as you're grinding. So slower than a standard bench grinder, but not as slow as a lot of people think it is. Downside of the Tormek is it's really, really expensive. You're looking at about $800 for the larger unit, where a standard bench grinder, you can go to Rockler on an average day and spend, I don't know, $115, $125 for a bench grinder that's set up and ready to go. There's the Sorby Pro Edge. That's right around $550 for the deluxe unit with all of the wood turning jigs. It's a belt sander. People have been using belt sanders for, decades as sharpening devices. It's fine. Not my preferred method, but there's an enormous amount of people that do like it. In the UK, it is definitely the preferred method of sharpening over a standard bench grinder or a Tormek system, just because that's what they have been doing for years, where on this side of the pond, we've been doing more grinding wheels as our sharpening preference. But there's lots of options out there. And the jigs, the cool thing is the jigs all kind of work in the same manner. So while I'm going to focus on the bench grinder and the accessories for that, if you have these other devices, the jigs themselves function in the same way, that the movements are very similar. So it's all of the information that I give about this one setup will apply to the other setups. Obviously, with the belt sander, you have the option of different grits for that of belts for that device. You can go more aggressive grit, you can go much finer grit, and things of that nature. With the bench grinder, you're dealing with grinding stones. On mine, I've got an 80 grit stone here, and this is my primary method of sharpening. This is what I sharpen all of my standard heavy duty hogging out working tools. So most of my tools are simply sharpened on an 80 grit stone. Now, you'll notice that the color is blue. This is a Norton 3X blue. It is not a white aluminum oxide. I don't remember what the composition is, but the material used in this blue stone is not as friable. It's not as crumbly as the white aluminum oxide stones, and that will give me more life out of my stone because the stone's of a better quality. I have no association with Norton. You can use whatever you want. The white aluminum oxide wheels that come like on that $100 Rikon that I mentioned at the beginning will work just fine. Just know that that material is a little bit softer than something like this, and the more pressure you apply to it, the more stone you're going to wear away in a faster amount of time. The other wheel I have on here, this is a Cbn wheel, so my grit happens to be 400. Don't write that down, just my personal preference. Cbn, that stands for cubic boron nitrate. That is a metal/ceramic composition that has been applied to the surface of a steel wheel. So you can kind of see that there. This is a metal wheel here, and it has a metal ceramic coating on top. This is not diamond, it's cubic boron nitrate. And this will give me a superior grind as opposed to a standard stone. Okay. I'll get into this here a little bit more in a moment, but that does not mean this will make my tool more sharp. We'll talk about that in a minute, because the other grinding stone material that I wanted to talk about is actually diamond. And if you're running a Tormek or something that is running ultra slow, anywhere from 90 to 150 RPM, you really don't want to put a Cbn wheel on there. I know there's manufacturers out there that sell wheels, Cbn wheels, that are large enough to fit on a Tormek or a Tormek clone type machine. A Cbn wheel must run at least 1725 RPM in order for you to get the efficiency that you've paid for out of that wheel. Because Cbn, cubic boron nitrate, cuts steel. It does not grind steel. So when you go back to these two wheels, my grinding stone grinds away material. My Cbn wheel cuts away the metal. It's not the same process, but you cannot cut metal at 90 RPM. It simply isn't possible to do. The wheel's not moving fast enough. And Tormek's solution to that was, instead of developing a Cbn wheel for their units, which they could do, and it would have been good money, they came out with a diamond wheel, which is very similar to the Cbn. It's a metal wheel of some sort, but it has, instead of having the cubic boron nitrate on the surface, it actually has a coating of industrial grade grinding diamonds. And those come in 3 different grits right now. Like the Cbn wheel, you don't have to dress it, you don't have to modify it, you don't have to mess with it, which is awesome. But diamond is going to be the most effective grinding method at 90 to 150 RPM. Cbn is going to be the most efficient method at 1725 RPM and higher. Standard grinding stone is going to be the more aggressive method, no matter what speed you're running. That's simply designed to remove material. Now, I said I'd circle back to this, and I'm going to. Sharp. A tool is either sharp or it's not sharp. There is no in between. And once you make a tool sharp, you cannot make it more sharp. Okay. I need to ask you guys to change the way you think about this one concept just a little bit. Sharpening something on my 80 grit stone, which is here. Once that tool is sharp, it's sharp. It's every bit as sharp as it would be off of a 400 grit Cbn wheel. The difference is that 400 grit Cbn wheel will give me an edge that is more fine. That it's not the same as being more sharp, because you can't be more sharp. It's sharp or it's dull. Those are your choices. You can get it sharp and aggressive, like on that 80 grit stone, or you can get it sharp and much more fine on a higher grit stone. That's why they've introduced these other grits. The higher the grit, the finer the edge, not the sharper the edge. A sharp edge is simply where 2 planes of metal come together and create an edge. Okay, once you have an edge, you can't have more of an edge. What you can do is refine that edge and make it more fine. That's where the advantage of these higher grit wheels are. But I got to tell you, 80 grit is more than enough to get your standard working tools sharp. That's all you need. You don't have to buy a Cbn wheel. You don't have to have 16 different grits working your way up the scale. On high-speed steel turning tools, it does not have to be razor sharp. You don't need a mirror finish, except maybe on a skew sometimes. Most of the rest of them, you don't need that amount of sharpening. That's what you do to your high carbon steels, your bench chisels, your hand carving tools, your pocket knife, your kitchen cutlery, things of that nature. Different metal, different style of sharpening. High-speed tools are designed to take an enormous amount of damage during an enormously impactful process. Okay, we've got chunks of wood spinning at 500, 1,000, 2,000 RPM, depending on the diameter, and we're expecting our tools to cut literally miles at a time before we come back over to the grinder and sharpen up that edge. When you leave the grinder, it needs to be sharp. It does not have to have an ultra fine edge, because the finer the edge, the less edge retention you have when you go back to your lathe. And that's the trade-off. If you have a very fine edge, so I've got this 400 grit Cbn wheel, it's going to make a very fine edge. My edge retention is lower than my sharpening a standard tool on the 80 grit stone. The 80 grit stone is going to give me a more aggressive edge, and I'm going to want to use that for something like hogging out a bowl or processing stock or whatever. But when I go into my finishing cuts, that's when I want to go to that higher grit. Okay, so I'm going to sharpen my tools to a higher grit, get a more fine edge so I can get a more clean cut, but my edge retention is low, and that edge is only going to hold for a couple of passes in reality. That's why I'm not messing around with 180 grit or 250 grit or 300 grit. I've got an aggressive stone. I've got a high grit Cbn wheel. I do have a couple of options on the Tormek, but I don't use that a lot on my turning tools unless I'm doing a demo, simply because I don't need them. Okay, we don't need to spend a ton of money. We don't have to have too many options. We just need to get our tools sharp. So unless you have any questions on the wheels or the setups, we'll move into actual sharpening. Does anybody have any questions? Unmute and go ahead and ask. Oh, and one thing that I didn't mention at the beginning, you can open your chat window. On this screen in front of me, I've got a monitor. I can see the chat window. If you have a question, if you don't want to ask it on a microphone, type it into the chat box, and I'll read it and respond in real time. So anybody have any questions at this point? Charlie, I think your mouth is moving.
Yeah, my mouth was moving. I had my space bar down. I guess that didn't work.
Okay, yeah, it didn't work.
All right. So if everybody hasn't done it already, if you would go to speaker view, then you can see Jeff full size as opposed to the gallery, which is better. But then relative to sharpening, if you don't know whether you have the high speed or the high carbon, you can look at sparks. The sparks that come off the wheel are different with the two metals, will help you decide. And the other thing is with your CBN, you do not want to use your high carbon on a CBN. It will plug it up.
Yeah, this is true. This is true. You will load your Cbn wheel if you sharpen lawnmower blades or cheap Chinese tools or older high quality but high carbon turning tools. You'll ruin your Cbn. Cbn is for high speed steel only. There are things that you can buy that claim they will clean it. People have said you can take a high speed steel tool out of its handle and use the butt end of that tool to clean it. The problem is you can't get it back to factory spec once you start loading it up. You'll be able to remove some of that material, but you'll never be able to get it back to normal. Easiest thing to do is don't sharpen anything except high-speed steel on CBN. On stone, on diamond, doesn't matter. You can sharpen whatever you want. CBN specifically for high-speed steel. Anybody have?
Can anybody hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Are you going to go over hand sharpening with different stones?
No. That's, yeah, Tom did not put that in the outline, so we're not going to be able, no, hand sharpening of any kind is really going to have to be an entire demonstration by itself. But if you're talking about like with whetstones, use an aggressive stone. Don't work through the process with all of them. Pick a grit that will do the job. So if you've got like an 80 or 120 grit whetstone, if that's where you're at, hand sharpen your tools on that. Don't worry about the other higher grits because with turning tools, you simply don't need that level of refinement. It's not necessary. It's not going to give you an advantage. Sharpen with your like an 80 or 120 grit stone, whatever your heavier grit is. That'll get you back to work. That's really all you need. Okay. And if we need to do something on hand sharpening, we can do that in a different session or in a private session or whatever. Okay. All right. Any other questions?
Thank you.
You bet, Joe. All right.
Unless you want to go to the tip shape first.
All right. No, we'll cover the tip shapes as we do it. All right. So we're going to get into some actual sharpening demonstration.
Go over your very grind first.
Yeah, we're going to get in some actual demonstration, but you need to know what your jig settings do. Okay. And I have discovered what the best angle is. So if everybody's ready, got their pens ready, write this down. You ready? The best angle is there is nothing that is the best angle. There is no such thing. Anybody that says one angle is better than another either doesn't know what they're talking about or they're trying to get you to buy something. Okay. There is no such thing as the best angle because the angle itself is 100% subjective based on your tools, how you like to turn, and the project that you happen to be working on at that moment. Angle is subjective. Consistency in your grind is the most important thing that you can do. And if that's the one takeaway you have from this session, then that's great because it's the most important. Being able to go over to your grinder or whatever and reproduce whatever angle you like exactly the same way over and over every single time is way more important than what that specific angle is, because when you get back to the lathe, muscle memory is a thing. If you keep changing your grind every time you go back to the lathe, your hands have to find that new bevel or a new facet of that new bevel and try to figure out how to do it. So it's going to trip you up when you go back to the lathe. You'll have a much smoother process if you don't keep changing your grind. And that's where these jig systems give you a huge advantage because you don't have to worry about it. You get your settings, whatever settings reproduces whatever angle that you like or that is effective for the job that you're trying to do. you lock it in, and you reproduce that angle every single time. And the other thing that I like to mention up front, because a lot of my beginners don't seem to understand this, if you buy a tool, put whatever grind you want on it. If you buy a tool from Rockler, Woodcraft, good chance it's not going to have your preferred grind. Don't try to match the grind that's on the factory tool unless you're just trying things out, that you're looking for a different grind. Me, I know what my preferred grind is, and I want my tools. I don't care what manufacturer, I don't care when I get them, if they're brand new, if they're old, I don't care. First thing I do is I bring them into my shop, I put my grind on it because that's what I like. I don't have to use a factory grind, okay? And if you happen to like the factory grind, that's fine. Most of the time, the factory grind is not what I want it to be. Therefore, it's my tool. I'm going to change it and make it mine, make it how I want to work. You can do that. It's your tool. You bought it or you acquired it or it was given to you. Once it's yours, make it whatever works for you. Don't keep mucking around trying to work with something that you don't like, okay? And that's why having a baseline and understanding what the jigs do is going to give you a better chance to not only line out a particular grind that you can reproduce exactly the same way over and over and over again, but it will also give you the ability to change things up, experiment, and if you decide, I don't like that new thing, go right back to the old grind because that's what you know how to do exactly the same way every single time. So pick a grind, any grind. Now I can give you an example of what I teach my students as their standard default grind, and there's reasons why I choose this. Doesn't make it the best, just makes it what's best for me. And in my opinion, what's best for my students, especially at the beginning. And then, sometimes the grind actually gets in your way and you do need to change things up. Anyway, your tool, your grind, pick it, learn it, reproduce it, and put it on every tool that you get. And then when you're ready to try something else, try something else. So in order to reproduce this, especially with jigs, I've got my Wolverine set up here. It's on the bench grinder. It's just the standard Wolverine system. We'll zoom out just a little bit. All right, so I've got a platform. I've actually got two. I've got two of everything. I've got two platforms. I got two V-arms because that's what I like to have in my shop. They're both shorter, but I'll get into that in a minute. I have my Very Grind jig, okay? Just a standard one-way Wolverine Very Grind jig. This is the Very Grind original, or one. Don't get the Very Grind 2. They tried to make it better and they ruined it. Don't get that, Linda. Anyway, no, seriously, get the Very Grind one. The original is all you need. It doesn't have to be a one-way. Lots of different manufacturers make similar things. The Tormek jig is similar. I don't have it handy, but it looks very similar and the function is exactly the same. The movements are the same with the Tormek jig. You can buy them, you can get them from one way, you can get them from Ken Rizzo, you can get them from an enormous amount of people. There's plans all over the internet. If you're handy and want to do a home shop build of a one-way type system, there's plans online. You can buy plans from Captain Eddie and do make your own system if you want, and they all work about the same. But go with this style of jig. Don't go with the Very Grind 2. Seriously, they screwed it up. Now, when we're talking about what the different settings do, when we're working with something like a bowl gouge or a spindle gouge, we want that tool sharpened in our Very Grind jig. And the reason is we're probably trying to recreate some kind of compound bevel, most likely a fingernail type grind, because that's going to give us the best cuts, the best scrapes, the most flexibility out of that tool. On a spindle gouge with a longer nose, longer pointier nose, it's going to give us the ability to use that standard tool as a detail tool. We don't have to have a bunch of extra tools. We can use it as a standard detail tool. And we want to reproduce that fingernail grain grind with this one-way jig. Now, the settings, the length the tool sticks out of the nose. Give me a bowl gouge. The length the tool sticks out of the nose determines the shape of the nose. All right, it determines It determines what happens here, all right? We're creating a compound bevel. We've got a right wing, a left wing, and a nose. The protrusion shapes the nose, okay? The leg shapes the pitch of your wing. So if you're looking right down this flute, the leg setting will change how steep or how open your two wing profiles will be, okay? You have control over that. If the leg of the jig is further up, the wing profile is going to be more open. What that gives you is the chips will clear faster. You will have more control. Downside, it's not as aggressive. So your cuts are not going to move as fast. But if you know how to change your settings, you can dial the tool into how you want to use it. If the jig leg is further down, like Doug Thompson suggests on his grind, and I've got a jig set specifically for Thompson tools because it's a different grind. But you can see that leg is much further down, right? It's at a steeper angle, and that will make your wings pitch in a little more, makes the tool a little bit more aggressive. Downside is it's not as easy to control. It'll remove wood faster, but you have to be prepared for the control factor, all right? So that's just something to keep in mind. You have control over this. On my preferred grind, it's a 50-degree modified fingernail is what they call it. My jig setting is the leg is just below the second notch, all right? You can see it right there. There's a slight light gap underneath that second tooth from the top, and that gives me about 22.5, 23-degree angle here, all right? For me, that's perfect. My wing profile is a little bit more open, means the chips are going to clear faster. I'm going to have a little bit more control. Downside, it's not going to be as aggressive, so I need to spend a little more time with my cuts. That's the way I like it, and that's the way I like it for my students. On mine, I prefer a 2-inch protrusion. It's going to modify the nose profile the way I like it. It's a little more blunt, or a little less blunt. It's a little more open. Again, a little more control, a little less aggressive. On the Thompson grind, he suggests 1 3/4 inches. On his, the tool is sticking out of that jig 1 3/4 inches here, and that will make the nose shape a little more blunt, a little more aggressive. Trade-off, lose a little control. There's always a trade-off, right? Doesn't make one better than the other, it just is. And then the other thing is the actual bevel angle on that bevel, all right? And for me, I prefer a 50-degree. Doesn't make it the best, just makes it what I like. Thompson recommends a 60-degree. It's just different. And the way you determine the bevel angle is the distance between the V pocket and the grinding surface itself. So I'm going to take my V pocket, and I want to talk about this real quick briefly. The one-way system comes with a V pocket bar, and it normally has a really long bar. I've cut the ends of my bars off, right? That's a shop modification, so my bar is short. Why? Because I don't need 2.5, 3 feet worth of bar, because I do not ever want to put the handle of a tool in the V pocket. I know what the box says. I know what the pictures on the box says. I know what the instructions say. But you got to understand those photographs and those instructions were all put together in the late 90s when this product first came out, and they have never been upgraded or changed since then. We now know that it's a really bad idea to put the handle of any tool in the V-arm pocket and lay that edge up against the wheel. See that? Don't do that, okay? I know that's what it looks like in the picture. That's the marketing image. Don't do it. It's been determined that this is really dangerous. And the reason why is, especially if you have a wood handle, wood's flexible. You put any downward pressure on that, handle might bend. If it does, the tool tip is going to jam into your grinding stone. If you're on a stone wheel, what's probably going to happen is the stone itself is going to chip or shatter. If you're on a Cbn or a diamond wheel, wheel's not going to give. The tool in your hand is the only thing that's going to be able to give, and you could end up getting hurt CBN manufacturers are actually starting to include a warning with their wheels specifically saying, don't do this. And it's because it's dangerous. And this is not an efficient or effective manner of sharpening any of your tools, okay? V-pocket, that's for your jig. The jig goes into the pocket and that's it, okay? Things that like roughing gouges or skews, you sharpen those on the platform. It's easier. Trust me, it's easier. So in my shop, I've cut my bars down. There is no way a student can come in and extend this long enough to put the handle of any tool that I own into the jig. They're not going to get hurt. I'm not going to have broken tools or wheels or students. So that little soapbox on there, just something to keep in mind. Let's zoom back in once again. So I've got my V pocket, and that just goes into my jig system here. Now, how do I determine the distance of the V pocket from the wheel? Well, there's a couple of different ways. The easiest way is to use a jig. For me, for my grind, I want a 50-degree angle, so I need to set the distance of the V pocket from the stone that will allow me to reproduce a 50-degree angle. Spending $8 and buying a jig that says 50 degrees was the solution for me. But there are other options. There's an article out there called Sharpening Demystified, and this was put out by my teacher, Kirk DeHeer. And the article was released in the AAW magazine, American Woodturner, and you can find this article online. But he gives you the instructions on how to make wood setting jigs. If you don't want to spend money and buy a jig, there's instructions out there that will allow you to make your own jig, and it covers the dimensions for a block of wood that will allow you to set that V pocket at varying degrees so that you can sharpen your tools exactly the same way every single time. Now, if you've got a CBN wheel, like I've got on this side, you could mark the V bar at a specific distance. Once you figure out your angle, you could scribe a line on your bar. If you're running a stone wheel or anything that's going to get smaller, that's not going to be effective, because every time you grind, that distance is going to get shorter and shorter. So you'll have to keep moving your bar in, and it won't be effective. Now, I don't like the marking of the bar. Simply because if you do that, if you mark your bar, you've got to be dead on every single time. And if you're a little bit further in or a little bit further out, it's going to change things. Maybe not enough to bother you, but it's going to be enough to bother me. So I would rather take a jig, either a purchased jig or a shop-made jig, and use that to dial in the distance between my V pocket and the wheel itself. That's 100% repeatable, exactly the same every single time. And it doesn't matter which wheel I'm working with. I'm going to use a pre-made jig that is set at a specific angle to allow me to set the distance of my V pockets from that wheel. And that will determine the general bevel. Now, I'm going to cheat. I have tools where the handle will come off. So to keep things easier for me, because I'm lazy, I'm going to go ahead and take the handles off because I don't need them. When you're sharpening, even if you can't take the handle off, ignore it. The handle doesn't exist when you're sharpening. You never hold a tool by the handle. The reason is, the further down your hand is on that tool when you're trying to sharpen, the more chance you're going to lift up or pull down. That's going to change your grind, okay? Key is consistency. Don't hold your tool by the handle, hold the jig. If you hold the jig, it's going to be exactly the same. Now, we go back over here to the grinder. Let's zoom out just a smidge. You can see these little red tabs here. These are distance setting tabs here. You can only see one, and it's the wrong one. But that will determine how much tool I have sticking out of that jig. For me, for this grind, it's 2 inches. So I'm going to go over here to my jig, and I'm going to use that jig to lock that tool in at exactly 2-inch protrusion, exactly the same every single time. If you don't want to buy one, Um, Glue or nail a piece of wood at 2 inches. Linda, when she was over here for a hands-on lesson, she had a device where, I think Tom made it, where he just took a block of wood and drilled a hole exactly 2 inches into that block of wood, and she can use that to set the depth of those particular jigs. Yeah, if you're using wood, every time you smack your tool into that piece of wood, you're going to chip away some of that wood. So take a penny and a drop of CA glue and glue a penny onto your little wood block or in the bottom of your little wooden jig. That way it's consistent every single time. You're not really going to worry away that wood, which will start changing the protrusion of your tool. So just lots of little things to think about, and everything you can do to make this easier and more consistent, the better off your sharpening session is going to be. Now, like I said, it's 80 grit stone, more than enough to get my standard turning tools sharpened. Most of my tools are sharpened right here. 80 grit's more than enough. But the way this works is that V pocket will hold the leg of the jig. That just goes right down in there. So it's in the back of the jig. Now the hand that is holding the jig is simply holding the jig. I'm not going to hold the tool steel. If the tool had a handle on it, I'm not going to hold the handle. I'm going to hold the jig. Doesn't matter if you're right-handed or left-handed. It all works the same. But when you're doing this, I want you to think about this right wing, left wing, center. And unlike politics, the right wing and the left wing have to work together. They always work together because of that center. But as wood turners, we spend most of our time cutting or scraping on either the right wing or the left wing. We are rarely using the nose of most of our tools most of the time, so you don't need to sharpen that much. You need to focus on your wings, okay? And you know when your tools go dull, they stop working. But you can also look at this profile here. If there's any shiny surface, I like to consider it like a horseshoe. If there's any shiny surface that you can see, your tool's dull. And having a good light at the grinder is kind of helpful because you can see flat spots or dull spots. That's how you know it's not sharp. When you finish sharpening it, all you got to do is look at that tool in the light, you know, just back and forth trying to catch a glint. There's no glint, there's no flat spots. If there's no flat spots, tool sharp, you're ready to go back to work. And once you get that profile established, it only should take a couple of seconds, literally. A couple of quick passes is all you need to sharpen your tool once you've established your grind. The more pressure you apply, the more steel you waste. Light hand, you're sharpening. You're not grinding a lawnmower blade. Lawnmower blades usually require a lot of pressure. It's just how they work. Now, I see a lot of people that they come over here and they'll roll back and forth, back and forth. Don't do that. You're getting in your own way because you're spending too much time now working on the nose, and that's not important. Break it up into 3 sections, okay? Just come over and start by grinding your right wing. Remove the tool. Flip it over. Do the exact same thing on the left wing, whether it's 3 passes or 5 passes. If you did 5 passes on the right side, do 5 passes on the left side. And then once your wings are sharp, then go back and roll the nose to combine. Now for me, if you're watching me in my shop, it looks like I'm going post to post, but I'm really not, because I've already developed the muscle memory that as I'm coming across, I'm lifting back. And maybe it doesn't come off the stone all of the way, but it's definitely coming off and I'm not grinding on that nose. But if you simply go post to post, you're going to end up taking more metal away just below where the nose meets the wings, and that's where you get that little dipsy doodle and the hook beak on the nose. It's because you're spending too much time removing too much metal from the nose itself, all right? So let's go ahead and do this in real time. Grinder on, back into the jig, allow it to come up to speed. And because it's an older grinder, it takes a little bit more time, but I'm going to do 3 or 4 passes on the right wing. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to physically remove it, flip it over. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I'm going to check my dull spots or shiny spots, and I've got a nice light right here. I've actually got a little shine right at the edge of the right wing, so I want to go back and I want to roll that a couple more times, flip it over, roll that left a couple more times. Pretty happy with that. Now I'm going to go in and I'm going to roll the nose to blend. I'm not going all the way back on those wings. I'm simply combining the two surfaces. And if I see something, let's see if I can get this on camera. I've got, there. No, focus is locked. Let's go to this one. I've got a slight dipsy doodle. It's a little more exaggerated because of the angle I'm holding, but there's a little dip right there by the nose. And I'm really happy that I got that, a little dipsy doodle. And that's because I haven't spent enough time on the nose now. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to work on the nose. If you've got that little dip, you need to remove just a little more metal from the tip of the nose itself. So I'm going to get in here and I'm going to focus on that. And just like that, that little dip is gone. Now I added one to the right side. There we go. All right. Super simple, super easy. Work your bowl gouges and your standard spindle gouges in three distinct sections: right wing, left wing, nose, and spend the least amount of time on the nose. Unless you get a little dipsy doodle, that means you need to work a little more on the tip of the nose in order to dial that in. And right here, let's see if I can get a good side profile. Look that way there. You can see it's got a nice shape, nice curve, consistent. I'm looking down on it. I've got no glints of light reflecting back, so I know it's sharp. This tool's ready to go back to work. Now, on my tools, there's oftentimes a secondary bevel. Technically, it's not a bevel. It is just me getting steel that is in my way out of my way. The longer the bevel, the harder it is to make a curve on the inside of a bowl. I'm primarily a bowl turner. I do a lot of bowls. I can work very well with a short bevel, short thickness wise. So I grind the heel off my tool. There's no jig setting. I just do it by hand because it gives me an advantage in what I'm doing. On the inside of your bowls, if you're getting lots of speed bumps down the inside, it's because you're trying to scribe an arc with a very long straight piece of metal and you can't do that. You have to shorten that bevel, make a shorter piece of metal, and you can scribe a tighter circle. Okay, so pay attention to what your tool's doing on your turnings. You can tell, is it sharp? Is it dull? Is my bevel getting in the way? Am I catching the nose? Am I dragging the heel? Am I making speed bumps? And if you're making speed bumps, maybe you're ready to knock that heel off just a little bit. No big deal. If you wanted to do that, come back over here to your grinder, turn your grinder on, and just roll your tool to worry away a little metal off of that heel, and you can get a secondary bevel, which is not going to come into focus. You can kind of see it there. But that's your bowl gouges. Now, if you've got a bowl gouge that straight from the factory that you're not happy with, if you have a brand new grind, you drop it. If you've got a lot of dips and dings and swoops and stuff, if you've got hard corners on that brand new factory grind, Robert Sorby tools. The one thing I don't like about their factory grind is you've got hard corners on your bevel. You want a nice curve here, all right? And this is my tool. I can modify it however I want. So quick tip on that, take your gouge, the flute's facing away from yourself, take the hand that is going to hold the tool and bridge that flute with your finger. This gives you a reference point because I need to have my flute centered on that grinding wheel. The easiest way for me to visualize that is if my finger is spanning that flute in an even manner. When we come back over, I didn't want to do that. When we come back over here, get my V pocket out of the way. So what I'm going to do, my finger is spanning the flute, right? Switch my hand so that you can see it a little bit better. My finger's spanning the flute, and I'm simply going to start on the high side of the wing And when the grinder is running, I'm going to draw that tool down in an arc. All right, so I'm curving my tool, and what that's doing is it's giving me a nice curve on the surface of my bevel. It'll get rid of hard curves. It'll give me a much better shape, which is going to work better on the inside of my bowl turnings. I'm simply getting stuff that's in my way out of my way. Because it's your tool, you can modify that. So let's do that. This tool doesn't need to be reground, but for the sake of the demonstration, we'll go ahead and do it now. All right, we're up to speed. I'm spanning the flute with my finger for reference and very light pressure. I simply want to draw the tool down in a manner that gives me, let's go to the other camera. You'll be able to see it here. But you can see right there, there's a very shiny horseshoe, right? You can see it right there. Right at the top, comes down both of my wings. It's flat. I've ground away all of my cutting edge. I have a flat but consistent surface. Now I can go back to the grinder, put it in my jig, right wing, left wing, right wing, left wing, until my wing sides are sharp and there's no more reflection, and then blend in the nose right at the end, okay? Now, sharpening in real time should literally take seconds. So I'm going to stop my grinder. We'll go ahead and stop the grinder, and I'm going to do, Tom's going to stop my grinder, and I want to do this in real time. All right, so the tool's not in the jig. The V pocket bar is not in the jig. So somebody want to time me. We're going to sharpen a tool in real time. This is how much time it should take once you're practiced. So Tom's going to time me. Tom's setting up a timer. You ready? All right, go. All right. So V pocket is in, and I'm not rushing. I'm doing it right, just like I would on any other regular working day. All right, 2-inch protrusion. Grinder's on. Longest part of the ordeal is waiting for this thing to come up to speed. In the V pocket, usually 4 on the right, 4 on the left, inspect. Roll my nose, inspect, stop. All right, 30, almost 36 seconds, about 36 seconds. And that's real time, okay? 36 seconds is all you should need to put a fresh edge on your tool. And it'd take the same amount of time if I was sharpening on the Cbn wheel. And depending on the cuts that I was doing, that determines which wheel I sharpen on, okay? But that's the bowl gouge. All bowl gouges, doesn't matter what brand. The only thing is if you do use Thompson tools, go with his jig settings. You should have gotten a PDF that tells you specifically the leg angle. It's just above right at the second notch from the bottom, and 1 3/4 on the protrusion here. The reason why you need to use these settings on his tools is because of the shape of the flute. The way he grinds his flute, these settings will make those tools cut the best that they can. So I don't like telling people how to sharpen them, but if you're Thompson tool users, you'll get the most effectiveness out of your tools if you use his grinding setup for those grinds. Now, when we're working with something like a standard spindle gouge, like this one, just a standard fingernail spindle gouge. Sharpen it exactly the same way as your bowl gouge. You've got a right wing, a left wing, and a tip. All right. Now, generally, the bevel angle on your spindle gouges is going to be a little bit more aggressive. So where my bowl gouge was 40 degrees, where my bowl gouge was 50 degrees, my spindle gouge is 40. It makes it a better slicing tool. It will allow me to use this and get a better quality finish. It will allow me to remove material more effectively, but in smaller amounts because of the depth of the flute. So 40, 45 degrees or so on your standard spindle gouges is just fine. Angle is subjective. This is what I like. And you sharpen it exactly the same way as your bowl gouges. For me, all of the settings are the same. On my jig, I don't change anything. I could weld this leg in place because that never changes. The only time it changes is if I have to replace this, and I had to replace it recently, and I set it exactly in the same place as I had on the previous one for the previous 8 years. I don't mess with that. If I need to sharpen a Thompson tool, I've got a second jig. Anytime I move this, even if I think I got it back to where it belongs, there's going to be a little variation, so I don't mess with it. But you don't have to. You don't have to change any of these settings. So spindle gouge, 2-inch protrusion, 23-degree angle on the leg, 40-degree angle on my bevel. I use the 40-degree setting jig from my Raptor, or you can make one out of wood or something that will give you that same angle reproduction. Consistency is key, bevel is subjective, but it's sharpened exactly the same way. All right, so we've done bowl gouges and spindle gouges. Mr. Tom, what is next? And does anybody have any question? Bowl gouges or spindle gouges? We can keep running, I'm okay. Any questions so far? No? All right. Let's go to the platform, because an hour is never enough time for stuff like this. Let's go to the platform. Spindle roughing gouge. Since I won't let you put the handle in the V pocket anymore, well, Jeff, what am I supposed to do with my spindle roughing gouge? Sharpen on the platform. Why?
Go borrow your neighbor's extra long one.
No, yeah, go borrow Tom's extra long one. No, sharpen your other tools on the platform. That's why you have a platform in your sets. It's super simple, very effective, and very easy to reproduce. Now, spindle roughing gouge, I just grabbed my big one, which is an inch and a quarter. I don't know what it is. It needs to be sharpened, and this is one of the few times where the factory grind is probably okay. I don't worry about the angle. I don't worry about the bevel. If you need a number, 35 degrees, set your platform at 35 degrees and grind your roughing gouges, your spindle roughing gouges to that angle. But most of the brands out there, except for the Harbor Freight, because that's technically not a spindle roughing gouge, most of the brands out there, factory grind is fine. Just eyeball it. Eyeball the factory grind. Very simple to do. I've got my platform here. So like the V pocket bar, I can move it in and out however I need. I can loosen and adjust my platform angle. And when I'm setting up the tool, this is usually loose. This is usually loose. And if I'm going to eyeball, I'll do it from the other side. I just get the platform as close as I can. I match the bevel on my tool. I lock it down in place, and I go to town. Okay? So I'm ready to sharpen there. The wheel's not touching my platform. This is something that you have to pay attention to if you're sharpening on a Cbn wheel. The steel of the platform is high carbon steel. It's much softer, and it will ruin your Cbn wheel. So make sure this platform does not contact that wheel. If it comes in contact with the grinder, the grinding wheel is just going to grind it away. No big deal. I could take a Sharpie if I wanted to, and I could draw Sharpie over that. I don't know if I've got one. See if I got one handy just over on that far bench. Yeah, right there. There you go. All right. If you don't know how sharp you're getting this one, take a Sharpie, color your bevel. You can do the whole thing if you want. You can do part of it. Just get the wheel moving. Touch. As you can see right there, I've only got a little cut right at the tip. That means my platform is not exactly dialed in. Instead of loosening everything, I'm going to simply give it a tap at the bottom, touch again, and just 2 taps at the bottom edge of that platform, and I'm making contact with the entire length of the bevel. That's how I sharpen these. If you want to use a setting jig, it's fine. I've got a 35-degree setting jig. I would take my jig and I'd put the short flat on the platform, and I would move this so that both of those points come in contact with the wheel. So the 2 points make contact with the wheel, the long flat makes contact with the platform. I'm a little off, but it's close enough for me. It's easier for me to just match that bevel much faster. Sharpening this tool is simple. Choke up on the tool. I'm ignoring the handle. Normally I'd take it out of the handle, but you don't have to. I'm going to hold the tool. My primary hand, I'm right-handed, so I'm going to hold the tool in my hand. That hand is holding the tool against the platform. My other hand, for me, it's my left hand. My fingers go on the backside of the platform for pressure. My thumb goes either across the flutes or in the flute, or at least on one flute to help hold that thing on that platform. And I'm simply going to roll side to side. Now, because I'm on the platform and I'm not in the V pocket, I've got much more control. It's much more safe, but I'm getting a more consistent and even edge here. This will also allow me to maintain these sharp corners, which is not as easy if you put that handle in the V pocket. You're eventually going to roll over those corners and remove some of the efficiency of this particular tool. So I'm going to power on. I'm choking up on the tool. Handle doesn't exist. And I'm simply going to roll that tool back and forth, all right? This one I am going corner to corner. Stop and inspect. All of my Sharpie is gone. I've got a nice edge. There's still a little flat spot right at the tip where I made that initial test grind. All right, that tool's sharp and ready to go. That's sharpened in real time. Now, if my corners get out of whack, if they're not lined up exactly the same, I can fix that on the platform. Roll that tool over until the corner is presented, and then I'm just going to slide it left to right, left to right, left to right. Okay, so this is what it looks like. Left to right, left to right, left to right. Roll back over to the other corner. Line it up, left to right, left to right, left to right. And that's it. That's your roughing gouge. Super simple, fast, easy, efficient on the platform. This tool's ready to go to work. No dipsy doodles in my edge. My corners are clean, true, and very sharp. That's how we sharpen this one. Any questions on the spindle roughing gouge? No? Good. Oh, something. Let's see, Ray had to leave. Yeah, spindle roughing gouge is definitely blunter 35. But that 35-degree angle is going to work for my scrapers too, my thick scrapers. Just got a round nose scraper here. There, so you can see it. Got a round nose scraper. Could be a square scraper, doesn't matter. Again, this tool you're sharpening on that platform. Also, again, as long as I've got a slight angle, I don't need to have a specific jig setting. I could go with 35 when I'm in the classroom. I could do that. Normally, when I'm here in my own shop, I just eyeball it. I want it to be sharp, but it doesn't have to be exact. And this one hasn't been ground in a while. So I'm going to go with my factory setting. This tool, again, I'm going to choke up. It's a round nose scraper. So I want to roll that tool. I'm applying pressure against that bar, and I normally hold it the opposite way, but I'd be blocking the camera. I apply pressure against the top of the scraper, make contact with the wheel, and I simply rotate the tool in an arc. That's going to give me that rounded profile, right? If I'm doing a square scraper, same deal, line it up. But on this one, instead of moving it in an arc, I'm going to go back and forth. I'm simply going to go side to side. That's all I need to do. I'm forcing a burr on the top of the tool, and that's what's going to do the scraping work that I need it to do. Scrapers are super simple. They're all about the same. Most factory grinds that I've come in contact with are acceptable. Now, there is one, the negative rake. I'm not gonna sharpen this one in real time, simply because it's a complicated setup. The negative rake, it's a rounded scraper, right? but I've got two bevels now, and my scraping edge is deeper into the body. It's not at the top surface. It's about a third of the way into the body. So I've got a 70-degree bevel on the bottom, got a 30-degree bevel on the top, and I want to sharpen the top first so that when I sharpen the bottom longer angle, it forces that burr, which is going to give me that really clean scraping action that I'm looking for. So on your negative rake scraper, sharpen your shorter bevel first, your top shorter bevel. On this one, it happens to be about 30 degrees. Do that one first, flip it over, sharpen that longer, more pronounced bevel from underneath. On this one, it happens to be 70 degrees, and that'll give you that proper burr right where you need it. Let's see. Have I ever tried sharpening scrapers upside down to put the burr on the bottom? I have not, mostly because in this day and age, most turners are not using scrapers as general stock removal tools, or if they are, they're using a carbide. If I needed a more aggressive burr, I'd flip it over. But most of the time, my scrapers are finishing tools. Sometimes I get a better edge, a better surface off of a nice sharp scraper, especially a really thick one, than I do off of a cutting tool sometimes. It depends on the wood, but I'm normally not using a standard scraper in a very aggressive manner. I'm using it as more of a finishing tool. So no, I don't sharpen it upside down because I don't want an aggressive burr. And then the other thing is, the bigger the burr, the faster you're going to lose it when you go back to the lathe. Okay, because it's just a twist, a curl of wire on the surface of that thing, and the bigger the curl of wire, the sooner the wood's going to knock it off. So I don't find it to be helpful or efficient. If you find that it works, that's awesome. I have never found it to be effective. Anyway, negative rake scraper, a little bit more tricky, but you sharpen on the platform. Honestly, I had this at 70 and 30 to begin with. I eyeball it now, and I don't worry about it. It's not necessary. All right, parting tools. Parting tools are easy. I've got a standard diamond point, spear point parting tool, right? This one happens to have that rib right down the middle. So I want my scraping tip right in line with that rib. It's running right down the center. If your parting tool doesn't have a rib, eyeball it. You want that scraping edge as close to the center of that bar as possible. These two angles on a standard spear point parting tool are going to be even, or as even as you can get them. And so that if it doesn't have that center rib, you can eyeball it pretty good without a bunch of measuring. Angles, I don't know. Factory grind is fine. I've never met a parting tool that needed a different grind, and I have no idea what the angle is, but it's another tool you sharpen on the platform. This one's really easy to eyeball. I just loosen everything, get in close, line up my bevel, lock that, lock the platform in place. And sharpening of this tool, again, I'm choking up on the tool, so the hand that's holding the tool itself is holding the tool, not the handle. I'm up here really close to the edge of the platform. My other hand is providing pressure down. And on this one, because I want a straight scraping edge, I'm simply going to go side to side. That's all I need to do. A couple of passes on one side, flip it over, a couple of passes on the other side. I'm not even really worried about sharpening the entire length of those spear points, because I'm only worried about that scraping, that little teeny tiny scraping edge right there at the point. That's what does the work. That's what needs to be sharpened. Doesn't matter which side you sharpen last. Try to remember which side that is, or put a mark on the tool, because you will have a burr on the upward side when you're done, and that will give you a better, more efficient scrape right at the offset. But you can flip it over. It doesn't make a whole lot of difference, simply because the main purpose of this tool is to separate one piece of wood from another. That's all you need to worry about. The other style of parting tool, oh yeah, there it is. All right, the other style of parting tool, your smaller parting tools and some of your fancier parting tools have a longer swoop on top and a very short blunt tip. very fine, small scraping edge. These I like to sharpen on my hand on the platform. I don't even muck with dialing anything in, so it doesn't matter what my platform is set to. It's a scraper, it's a parting tool. I'm not going to worry about it. I'm going to quickly regrind that hollow just to give myself a clean surface here, and then I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to just walk it into the wheel. I'm watching for the sparks to come over the top of that scraping edge, and I'm just going to hold it on the stone and go side to side. If there's sparks coming over the top, that means I am sharpening that edge. It only takes a couple of passes and you're ready to get back to work. Sometimes on parting tools, especially if you're working with a lot of resinous woods or sticky stuff, that you get some buildup on the sides. As long as those sides are flat, if you're working with something like that spear point scraper that has that rib, these sides are not flat. They've got a bevel there. And this trick won't work on that tool. But if you've got a parting tool with flat sides, if they get mucked up or gummed up, you can simply come to the outside edge of your stone wheel. Some Cbn wheels, not all of them, they have to have grit on the side. Not all of them do. But on your stone wheel, you can apply just a touch of pressure on the outside, and you clean up the outside face. You're not reshaping the tool. You're simply and you're cleaning off some gunk, which will help make your parting cuts a little bit cleaner, a little more efficient, and it doesn't not as likely to bind up. Richard, I'll get to your question about my CBN in a minute. I want to quick talk about the skew, which that is not. I want to quick talk about the skew, and then we'll take questions, and I'll answer that in a minute. The skew, throw it away. Stick with your bowl gouges. All right, next tool. No, I'm not a big skew fan. It's not my favorite tool. Because I'm a bowl maker, I simply don't use it that much. But it's another tool that's sharpened on the platform. Angle, 20-25 degrees or so. I don't worry about that. But if you need a number 20-25 degree bevel and then work with it, if you like it, stick with it. If you don't, now you know how to make some fine adjustments. You can dial it in however you want. But rule of thumb, and this is kind of what I go with, is I want the length of my bevel, this part here, I want the length of my bevel to be 1.5 times the thickness of my tool steel, okay? So depending on the tool, the thickness of the tool, that will determine the length of that bevel. I don't have to worry about finding sharpening jigs. I can eyeball this. This bevel is about an inch, about 1.5 times longer than my tool steel is thick, okay? And that's just a good rule of thumb. And different people like different angles. For me, it's efficient and effective enough for what I use it for. If you're somebody that needs an angled number, 20-25 degrees, start with 25. If you can adjust up or down, but maybe start with 25 if you're not comfortable with this tool yet. That'll be kind of middle of the road and adjust from there. But you gotta have a long enough bevel. So I've got another one over here that I got out earlier. Much thinner bar, right? You can see that, much thinner bar. Much shorter bevel because the bar is thinner, right? So this one is about 1.5 times the thickness of that bar, where this one, a little bit longer because that bar is a bit thicker, okay? They're sharpened radius skew, flat skew, sharpened in about the same way. Oval skew, I'm not going to talk about oval skew because I'd never use it. I don't like it. I'm not comfortable with that tool, and it's hard to hold because the tool bar itself has a curve to it. That's a weird tool, really weird tool. But the skew is sharpened on that platform. And again, factory grind, unless it's a super cheap tool, factory grind is probably going to be good enough. You can eyeball it. You can use your angle setting jigs, pick that angle, lock it in place, go to town. Now, it's a skew angle. So my tool will never be perpendicular with my platform. my tool handle will always be at a skewed angle. So this is leaning off at an angle. It's hard to see, and I don't have an overhead camera over here. But where this would be perpendicular, that would be at a slight angle, but that puts the cutting edge of my tool perpendicular to the stone itself, okay? And that's what I want to do. Now, if I'm doing a straight skew where the edge is straight across, easy way to line things out is to take a pencil and just make a line on my grinding stone. It doesn't matter where, just a line. Use your platform as your reference point, and that will give you a nice perpendicular line to that grinding surface. If I line that straight skew edge up like so, now I know exactly where my tool handle needs to be positioned to recreate that angle, that grind over and over again. I could do something as simple as take my pencil, draw a line on my platform. I don't know if you can see that. I don't think you can see that, but that shows me where the angle of my tool needs to be. To do the other side, I do the exact same thing. I line that straight edge of my skew up with that pencil mark. I make a line on the outside as reference. Now I could put pieces of blue tape here if I sharpen this tool a lot, just to give myself reference point as to where my handle needs to be lined up so that I can reproduce that straight edge. And when I'm sharpening, I'm just going to use my thumb and push the tool side to side. Flip it over, line the edge of the tool steel up with that pencil mark, turn on the grinder, start grinding, and I'm simply going to move that tool side to side, okay? Because I want a straight edge here. Now, on the radius skew, I've got a slight radius here. The lining up is about the same, but instead of moving this side to side, I'm going to rotate it like I did my round scraper. And that's going to give me the ability to make a really nice, clean, consistent radius. That's what I want on this tool. I'm just, instead of moving the entire tool side to side, I'm scribing an arc with the tool on the grinding stone, and that'll give me the ability to reproduce that edge exactly the same way every single time as well. And you can use the Sharpie trick on this one, just like we did on the spindle roughing gouge. I can eyeball it, paint my bevels with the magic marker, turn this on, touch it to the stone, see what was ground away, make adjustments to my platform, either at the bottom or at the top. I don't have to loosen anything, but that will allow me to dial it in relatively quickly and consistently in order to reproduce the grinds. Now, I think we've covered all of the basic tools that we wanted to cover. There was a question. So if you got questions, now's the time, but Richard asked a question. He wants to know, which tools do I sharpen on the 400 grit Cbn wheel? My finishing tools. Any tool that I'm going to use that's going to give me a finishing cut. However, the steel of that tool needs to be of a high enough quality that it will take and hold the edge that you want it to have. So, all right, let's say the skew. A skew I'm probably not going to sharpen on the 80 grit stone. This one in my shop, I will sharpen on the 400 grit CBN, but it's a Carter & Son tool, which means the steel is M42 high-speed steel. That's the highest, M42 is the highest grade currently available on the market. A11 powdered metal it's different. It's not better or worse. It's different because this is solid steel. Thompson Tools and a couple other brands made with powdered metal. It's not solid steel, it's a powdered metal. And the sharpening properties are different. One is not better than the other. You just have to work within the parameters of your tool. The advantage I find with M42 high-speed steel is it will take an ultra-fine edge and hold it long enough to utilize at the lathe. If I had an M2 tool, Robert Sorby, Benjamin's Best, Savannah, all the basic lower level tools, I'm not going to sharpen that tool on a 400 grit Cbn Wheel. Their effective range is from about 80 grit to about 250 grit. It's just the properties of the metal. If most of your tools are M2, nothing wrong with that. Don't buy a 400 grit Cbn Wheel. Top out at 250 because that's within the working parameters of that particular metal. Advantage of that tool, though, it's going to be a little bit cheaper. These cost a bit more, but they allow me to sharpen to a finer grit because the metal quality, the property of the metal, will hold that edge longer. The powdered metal, Doug actually says about 250 to 280 is the highest end recommended for his tools. They will perform in a very similar manner as M42 sharpened at 400 grit. So this is not better than the other. It's what I prefer, which just means it's what I prefer. His tool sharpened at the high end parameter, which is about 250 to 280, will perform in the same manner as this tool sharpened to 400. Really, the biggest reason with the powdered metal, I don't like the way the tool feels. That's why I prefer M42. But that's me. You know. Any other questions?
Yes, sir. I have one.
Yes.
When you look at the bevel,
Thanks, Tom.
when you look at the bevel in a light and you see, I wouldn't call them deformities, but okay, maybe this is the best way to ask it. When you look at the bevel, should the reflection be almost like a mirror without any deviations at all? No?
No, not on high-speed steel. Let me grab something that you watch me sharpen on an 80 grit stone. All right, so I've got my spindle roughing gouge. Now it's reflecting a lot of light, but you can also see that there's grinding marks.
Yeah.
It's hard to see, but there's grinding marks running up and down on the surface of this tool. And if you looked at it under a really good microscope, you could see that there's little variations. On high-speed steel, I don't want a mirror finish. I simply want the tool to be sharp. A mirror finish gives you an advantage. It's going to make your edge sharper because you're putting a finer edge on that tool. It's going to give you an advantage when you're using human power to maneuver that tool and make your cuts or your scrapes or whatever. That's where high carbon steel and a finer edge gives you an advantage. On wood turning tools, because of the quality of the modern high-speed steel, because of the fact that the wood is being spun by a machine, I don't have to spend a bunch of time honing and refining and polishing this edge because it's not going to hold up. The more fine the edge is, the less that edge is going to last the instant that edge touches the spinning piece of wood. Okay, so it doesn't have to be a mirror surface. It simply needs to be sharp. And that's why I tell everybody 80 grit stone is more than enough, because when it's sharp, it's sharp. That tool on that 80 grit stone is going to be more aggressive. The edge is going to last longer, and that's going to allow me to spend more time hogging out material than it would if I spent a bunch of time polishing this or sharpening my roughing tools on the 400 grit CBN.
I have one more. I'm sorry. One more question.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Do you know your tool needs to be ground when you don't get the curly links of wood chip?
No, because every piece of wood is going to be different. And sometimes, because of the species of wood or the wetness or dryness, sometimes you're going to get chips. Sometimes you're going to get splinters. Depending on the type of cut you might be doing, you might not get curls. It's kind of a good litmus in certain circumstances, but you got to know the certain circumstances. The way I know that the tool is dull is because I have to exert more effort. Okay, I'm lazy. Charlie knows it. Everybody that knows me knows it. I'm lazy, and I say this often. If I have to put out more effort than normal to make a cut, good chance it's because as I'm trying to push that tool into the wood's pushing back because my tool is dull. So it's a biofeedback kind of thing that If I'm pushing in and there's not as much resistance, I might be getting good chips. I might be getting sawdust, depending on the wood or the project. You know, maybe I'm doing a turning plywood or MDF or whatever. I'm not going to get curls off of plywood or MDF, but I can still tell when my tools are dull because of the way the project pushes back when I'm trying to make my cut. So that comes with experience. Always assume that brand new tools, doesn't matter who you buy them from, brand new tools are not sharp. They might have an edge that will cut you, but that doesn't mean they're sharp enough to get to work. You buy a brand new tool, take it to your grinder, put your edge on it, sharpen it the way you want it sharpened, get to work. Always. All tools are dull when you first get them, unless you go to somebody that sharpens them and they hand them back to you. If you are a wood turner, you have to have the ability to sharpen your tools at the very least once per project. On bowls, at the very least, once on the outside, once on the inside. And then you will start to learn. Once you start getting more comfortable with the sharpening, you'll learn when the tool's cutting, and you'll learn when the tool is resisting. Okay, and that's just a matter of experience. But if you get the sharpening process down, that learning experience becomes a lot simpler because you're not dealing with variables coming off the grinder. You've achieved consistency in your grind, and you've eliminated a whole bunch of variables at the grinder. Your bevel's exactly the same every time you go back, so you can learn how to use that tool faster. If that makes sense.
Yes, sir. One more thing. Early on, you said that there may be another session available for those of us that sharpen by hand.
Yeah.
Oh, how do I get that?
Well, you can get my email and reach out. We can do a Zoom session like this if you'd like. Honestly, really, a diamond card file is going to do you better than like whetstones. Hold the tool in one hand, get yourself a diamond card file. These come in a number of different grits. You can get anywhere, I think, from 150 to several thousand grit. Go with a heavier grit, like a 150 grit or something, and just take your turning tool. It's going to have a bevel on it. Now, you're not going to be able to reshape anything with hand sharpening, but find your bevel, go with that factory grind, and just work that diamond card in a manner that lifts a burr. Normally, I don't talk about having burrs. Normally, burrs are not important, but if you're going to do it by hand, do it in a manner that's going to lift a burr, just like you would any other hand tool, like one of Charlie's carving tools. He's probably doing a lot of hand sharpening with diamond cards and stones and whatnot, and he's trying to lift a burr. Same thing. So roughing gouge, super simple. Skew, super simple. Bowl gouge, a little more complex, simply because it's a compound grind. Keep losing my tools. No, I'll grab that one. I'll grab that one. But I could sharpen this. I have sharpened this in demos out in the field. Just the same thing. I'm just matching that card to my bevel. Now it's going to take some time. I'm not scrubbing back and forth. I'm simply going from the bottom of the bevel to the edge of the bevel in a single stroke. All right. So I'm only sharpening in one direction. For me, it's easier to do it away from myself because I've got a finger on the back of the card. I can feel where it's laying flat on that bevel. That'll at least get you going until you can upgrade your sharpening setup to give you an advantage in the sharpening.
Thank you, sir.
My pleasure. Okay, anybody else have any other questions?
I use those diamond honing guards a lot in between trips to the sharpener, back to the stone.
On your gouges too?
Yeah. Yeah.
You can.
Yeah. I mean, it makes a real
I'm lazy.
difference.
No, it doesn't make a difference for me simply because I can turn with a dull tool relatively efficiently. I probably get more out of my edges than I should. No, I know I do. But that's just because I'm more production minded. So I'd rather use it until it stops cutting come over and sharpen and get back to work.
All right, Jeff, thank you. Thank you very much. And great tips, even for those that have been turning for a long time. So picked up a lot of pointers.
Good.
Tom,
good. Glad I
thank
could
you.
help.
Thank you guys for setting this up.